Okay, so those are the two things that arose. Can I say that over the course of the next 2 days, I already said this once, but I just want to reiterate this. Especially with so many experienced people in the room, if you have something that you want to share with the room, okay, please don't take myself and John as just the oracle, okay? You guys have knowledge and information to share which is over and above our expertise, certainly my expertise, okay? So please, if there's something that occurs to you while we're talking, or something that you think would benefit the other people in the room while we're talking, please interrupt and share that information, as we progress. Because the idea is for people to get the maximum amount out of these sessions. With that in mind, we are now going to talk about copyright. Now, I learned from our initial introductions. We have attorneys here, we have copyright specialists, we have all kinds of people who know a lot about copyright. However, there are different levels of knowledge in the room. So I'm going to have to go back and do some fairly basic things and talk about some fairly basic things. And I hope that you will indulge me, those of you who already know a lot of what I'm going to say. But I'll try and keep it relatively fast-moving and hopefully relatively interesting. Okay? If at any point you have something you want to add, or I say something which is not the experience here, please interrupt me and make the point so everybody else in the room knows that that is not how things work here in Barbados. When you see the word copyright, it brings with it an air of mystery for many people. What I think dissolves that mystery is when you separate the two words, copy and write. Okay? Because put together, it looks like, a brand new concept. When you go back to when it originated and you separate the two words, it becomes very simple. The first Copyright Act was the Statute of Anne in 1709 in the UK. And one of the chief instigators of that act was a gentleman called Jonathan Swift. Now, those literary people amongst us will recognize the name Jonathan Swift as the writer of Gulliver's Travels. Okay? So not only was he a writer, he was also a politician. And he was getting very upset by the idea that he would come up with a good story and put it out, and people would copy his story and circulate it without any credit whatsoever. And he wanted to get paid for it. So he came up with this concept that you create something, you have an idea out of your head, okay? Intellectual property, that's what it means, okay? You have this idea out of your head. As soon as it is put into tangible form, so as soon as somebody can actually see that idea or hear that idea, you own the rights to it because you created it. Anybody who wants to use it has to get the right from you to copy it. You own the right, they have to obtain the copyright. Okay? Very simple concept. Now, the fundamental thing about copyright, it is an exclusive right. It is a property right. It can be bought, sold, or licensed, like any other property. And this is a very important concept in copyright, especially the exclusive right part of it. So you've created an idea, you own it. You can grant people the right to copy it. You can sell it. The people you sell it to can then grant people the right to copy it, because they have now obtained the copyright. Okay? So this is that fundamental principle. What is important in the recorded music industry, and this is something that people don't often quite grasp, is that in any piece of recorded music, there are two completely separate copyrights. There's the copyright in the song, and there's the copyright in the actual sound recording. And those two copyrights sit side by side. The copyright in the song is often called the masterwork or the underlying work. The copyright in the sound recording is often referred to as the neighboring right, the right that sits alongside the original copyright. Now, the way that people earn from copyright, particularly in the song sound, let me just go back a second. How many of you know a song that came out about 10 years ago by Kylie Minogue called I Can't Get It Out of My Head? Remember that song? Okay, well, it's a very useful example because it will surprise you to know that Kylie Minogue did not write that song. Okay? It was written by songwriters Rob Davis and Kathy Dennis. Right? So, in order to understand those two separate copyrights in the work, you need to understand that Rob Davis and Kathy Dennis and their publishers control the copyright in the song. EMI Records control the copyright in the sound recording, Kylie Minogue's version of that song. Okay? So that's just so you understand how those two copyrights sit side by side. So, earning from copyrights, particularly the public performance of work, which is a form of copying. When you publicly perform a work, it's a form of copying. The original earnings from the copyright in the performance of a work date back to 1847, when a gentleman called Ernest Boucher was in a coffee shop in Paris. And he heard the people in the coffee shop playing his song. So when he had his coffee and the people came to him with the bill, he said, well, okay, I'll pay the bill for your coffee if you pay the bill for you using my work, which I've been listening to all the time I've been in the coffee shop. Okay? And it came to the courts, and the courts agreed that they ought to pay him for the use of his work in public performance. And that was the creation of public performance rights in the use of a song. The performance in the public performance rights in a sound recording didn't come about until just under 100 years later. 1934. There was a Copyright Act in the sound recording. 1911 came into force the 1st of January 1912. That enshrined the copyright in the sound recording. But it wasn't actually employed until 1934. And what happened in 1934 was that a company called the Gramophone Company, which is what EMI Records used to be called, they sued a small coffee shop in Bristol called Cowardine's, because that coffee shop was effectively doing the same thing that the coffee shop in Paris had been doing with Ernest Boucher's recordings. What they were doing, they were taking those sound recordings and using them to entertain their customers who were there for afternoon tea. Yeah. Before that, there'd have probably been a string quartet in the corner, like Downton Abbey. You have Downton Abbey here? Yeah. There'd have been a string quartet in the corner entertaining the customers, keeping them happy while they were taking their tea. Well, the gramophone company said, well, hang on a minute. We paid all the musicians, we paid for the sound recording, and these people are now just taking our record and using it to keep their customers entertained, and we aren't getting anything. We believe we should be entitled to earn some money for this. So they sued them, and the courts agreed. So in 1934, PPL, Phonographic Performance Limited, became the first collection society for sound recordings, and that was in the UK. Now initially, the right was only granted to the copyright owners. the performers did not have a right to share in the revenue. In 1946, the Musicians' Union, and I point to John, I don't think you were there in 1946, were you, John? In 1946, a gentleman's agreement was made between the Musicians' Union and the recording companies to say that the musicians ought to have the right to benefit from some of this revenue that was coming from the public performance of sound recordings. Because if you think about it, it was the musicians that had lost their work, right? So an agreement was made, and notional elements were set to the amount of money that was supposed to be paid across, okay? Now, it was not what's known, you lawyers in the room will recognize these terms because you speak Latin. It was an ex gratia payment, okay? So it didn't have the force of law. It was a payment which was made out of the spirit of the agreement, out of the generosity of the company. They agreed that they would pay 20% to what they called the featured performers. We, I think more accurately, refer to them as the contracted performers, the people that actually had a record deal with the company. They were entitled to get 20% of the money. 12.5% was to be paid to the Musicians' Union for the benefit of the session players. Okay? So that was the agreement. And that agreement operated to a greater or lesser extent, as the years went by, I should say a lesser extent, until 1996. Okay? What happened, by the time that the music industry had got, some would say, more mature, I would say more greedy. By the early 80s, the performers were only getting their payments if they or their representatives knew about it. Right? The record company were not volunteering to make the payments that they had agreed to pay back in 1946. You know, if the record company, or if the performer or their representatives went to the record company and said, "Can I have my performer's PPL money?" then what used to happen was they would get a check. Say, oh, you know about that, do you? And they'd give them a check. And that check was always for just a round figure, £100, £200. And if you said to the company, sorry, I think this is supposed to be a percentage of, can you show me how you think, they say, we don't have to give it to you, so just be happy with it, right? Unless, of course, you were a major artist. Because, you don't think it's enough? Here, have another check. And they would give you some more. And that's kind of how it operated. All that changed in 1996 when the UK adopted something called the WIPO Performance and Phonograms Treaty. I'll only say that once. Okay? From on now it's called the WPPT. Okay? Now the WPPT was an extension of the Rome Convention, which John is going to talk about in a minute. And the Rome Convention, Barbados signed up to. Didn't actually sign up to the WPPT. The Rome Convention was passed in 1961 and was passed to protect recording companies and performers from the use of their sound recordings without payment. Okay. So the WPPT was an extension of that and got widely adopted across all the countries in Europe. And it said for the first time that performers must receive, with the force of law behind it, their share of the money that the copyright owners were collecting for the use of the sound recordings. They called it equitable remuneration, because it's hard for me to say, and also because it was written by lawyers. It just means a fair payment for the use of their work. Okay? So performers have been entitled to equitable remuneration for their work since 1996. And this means that whenever music is broadcast in public, the performers and the copyright owners are entitled to a payment. Now, it's not as straightforward as that, because nothing in this business actually is. This right does not exist in the United States, because they derogated from the crucial paragraph which granted performers these rights. So although US performers obviously have a wide play of their work internationally, they are not generally entitled to receive the kind of payments that performers from here, or the UK, or Canada, or most other countries in the world are entitled to receive. When it comes to radio broadcast, American artists are entitled to get paid on digital transmission of their work. And that came across through a completely different legislative agreement. It's called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or the DMCA. Again, I'm only going to say it once. Okay. The DMCA entitled performers to payment when their music was digitally transmitted. So in America, satellite radio, XM Sirius, Pandora, digital transmission, performers get paid from that. They still do not get paid from terrestrial radio. So terrestrial radio, which is a $22 billion a year industry, pay nothing to record companies and performers from the use of their work. Whereas in the UK, terrestrial radio pays quite handsomely for the payment for the use of their work. PPL, which I referred to earlier, which is the collective management organisation that handles those rights in the UK, last year collected and distributed £197 million. So it's a significant income stream.